Hello and welcome. You're listening to episode number 2 of Fablebreakers.
Today we'll be speaking with George Alexopoulos, an award-winning illustrator and graphic novelist from New Jersey.
George has been creating for a very long time. At least I think it's a long time. And I think it's safe to say he's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of the creative world, including a recent art theft, which we'll be able to talk about in a bit.
So George is going to share some of his creative wisdom with us and shed some light on what it really takes to be an artist in the big world of freelancing.
I'm Jake Romano.
And I'm Carly Racklin.
And we're here to take the myth out of making something meaningful. Awesome, fantastic. So, George, are you all settled? Can we start?
I am settled.
All right.
The background noise is settled. My stomach is settled.
Well, I have like I said, there's a train right outside my window, so...
Thank you for joining us today, George.
Yes, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. We are going to jump right in, because I don't want to miss our fable. For those of you who are just starting to listen, we're going to be taking fables during Fablebreakers each episode, and we're going to kind of deconstruct them, some of these myths that artists put up with and have to deal with. Sometimes there are truths to these fables, and George is going to give us a little bit of artistic wisdom and give us some insight into what he does to kind of break down the starving artist fable. Give me a percent, George. How much truth is there to the starving artist fable? And be brutally honest. Go ahead.
I can give you a percent in terms of how many years I got paid versus how many years I didn't. Let me go look at my income taxes. Starving artist, I'm going to say in my life I have been starving as an artist for 80% of my career.
Great. Okay, so thanks for joining us today. That's the end.
You guys want to hang up? It also is because I have social problems. That's also why. Not social, but network also and all that stuff.
Well, you're starting to branch out more, I feel, with you said you had social problems and network problems, so that's why they have social networks. You're starting to branch out more, right? You recently got a Webtoon account. Not recently. How long has it been since you got it?
Maybe 6 months.
All right, so you've had it for a little while, and you're starting to grow a following there, and people are paying attention, finally, to George, which we're all happy about. Because you've been drawing and doing this for a while now. You're a freelancer. What is that like for you? I'm getting vibes that it's challenging, probably, right?
I would say, all right. So the big balance is you get absolute creative and professional freedom on one end of the balance. And on the other hand, you get maybe financial security, let's say. Maybe you can think of it as a detective from a black and white movie. He's sitting there in his office and maybe he gets one big case. But then I'm thinking of specific detective novels that I like. But he might go months without a single client and he's just sitting there counting his money, trying to budget. So on the other hand, all right, so basically it's a question of I get to make my own hours. I get to do whatever I want 24/7. But of course, that means you have to have discipline. So it's a game of sorts of, do I have a client right now? Yes or no? Am I looking for clients? Are clients able to find me? And during the downtimes, I'm always trying to gather new skills or refine my current skill set so that when I get a new contract, let's say, I want to be even more qualified than I was, say, a year ago. So for example, the past couple of years, I've been training myself to do 3D modeling, which I didn't know how to do a couple of years ago. But it seemed that, I've been getting a lot of jobs in games development these past, let's say 4 or 5 years. So 3D stuff is really important, is a really important tool to have in your belt for those kinds of clients. So I already knew how to paint in 2D. I know how to do a whole bunch of stuff. So that's just a couple more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the tool belt thing. Like, I can do a whole bunch of stuff. I'm not a master of any of these things. It's more of a jack of all trades thing. Like, I'll get beaten out by A+ people, but I'm a decent B, probably.
Okay, all right, cool. So you had to kind of kick yourself into gear because there's, when you're at a job or whatever, you have other people doing it for you. Now you're your own boss. You're your own boss, and you're trying to make it yourself. So now you have to kind of refine your own skills and kind of push yourself. And that must be that's part of the challenge too. Like, being aware of what you need on your tool belt, what people are looking for. And that's where the social networking and stuff comes in. But you do a lot. You do a lot of different kinds of things. You mentioned you do, video games, you do illustrations, you do graphic novels. Where does all this creativity come from, George? Where is it all coming from?
But we're just born with it, don't you know?
Oh yeah, that's right.
If you just talk to other people, no? Okay, I'll give you a better answer. I honestly think it's as simple as when we were kids, we had things that we were passionate about, like let's say cartoons, games. We just loved them so much that we would copy them. And that just carried over year after year after year. And eventually you get really good at these things. I love comics. I always have. I've always loved games, and I've always loved books and movies. And I think all of the things I have developed, they all are interconnected. Storytelling is I would say, the foundation of all of the skills. So I loved stories. I loved reading them. I loved movies, games. But my favorite part of all of those media was the stories, the characters. And then let's say I really was passionate about writing. So then I also developed skills to back that up. I loved comics and games, so I learned how to draw because I loved those things. So I think the biggest connection is, or to answer your question, the reason I got into all of these things is because I love them so much, and I just there was a lot of input and I wanted to output it. It's like if you eat a certain food, if I eat a lot of chicken, I'm going to turn into a chicken.
I thought that was going to go somewhere else, but okay. Cool.
Just like real life, right?
Yeah, just like real life. You turn into a giant chicken. So you're a storyteller before you were an artist in a way, right? Like, so was art more of like a necessity? So you had these stories now, and you want to tell. Now the characters need to look a certain way, or you want people to see them visually represented. Was art more of kind of secondary to the storytelling?
Yes, but I could feel like people might roll their eyes when they hear that. But like, how do I put it? These characters and these stories that they just happen. Like, I'll be watching a movie, or I'll be listening to a certain song, and then this image will pop into my head, and then it keeps developing, and all of a sudden this whole cast of characters comes out of nowhere, and I have to write it down.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
I can't quite, I guess it's just related to, I don't know. There's a metaphor somewhere in there. You want to express it somehow.
I think that music is actually like a really big inspiration for a lot of writers. They'll listen to something, and it's such a complex medium, I think, because it does something weird to our brains where we need to create afterwards after we're listening to it. So
loving music is, maybe we don't have to know how to play instruments, but to love music, to really appreciate it,
Yeah.
There's a certain, I won't say a skill to it, but like there's marrow in those bones, Do you guys know that one, or am I just talking crazy?
I think that's the metaphor you were looking for.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Well, part of it is you need to know how to filter. You're talking about like input and output, and I think for creative people, some people don't know how to control their output, and some people don't know how to control their input. They'll burn out, or they by putting too much out, or they're not inspired enough and they have art block. So I think you have to be smart when you're an artist, right? You have to kind of filter stuff properly. If you just kind of take everything in, you'll like I said, you'll get burned out.
Sure.
So you have to be smart, and that takes practice. I think. I think it does.
It reminds me of like working out. You can eat a ton of protein, to go back to the silly chicken thing, but you can work out a ton, but your body still needs energy. Your spiritual creative body needs movies and music and all kinds of input, and then your output would be so much richer. If I am in the middle of production and I'm drawing and writing too much, but I don't watch enough movies, I will get so stagnant that I'll want to quit.
Yeah, I hear all the time that like one of the main things writers forget to do is read. And if you can't write, read, and that kind of thing. That if you feel like you can't produce the thing that you're trying to produce, then you consume it.
Oh, I never
consume
heard,
what other people have
never
made.
really heard that before. It's kind of interesting. And does it work?
Really?
Has that worked for you, Carly?
I think it helps. Yeah, like if I'm having trouble putting my own words on the page, maybe it's just because, I'm lacking that inspiration. So I go and read, and it helps to kind of rekindle that spark, where I see that other people are doing these amazing things with words, and I see that they craft this character a certain way. Or I'm going to make a silly metaphor here. So like, you're thirsty. Imagine a book as a spring.
Sure.
So if I don't have any words, there's where I get my fuel. Here's someone else's words that can help get my inspiration flowing again.
I like your metaphor better than George's chicken metaphor. So
Excuse you.
Oh, I like the marrow metaphor.
To clarify also, it doesn't have to be other people's art or movies or anything. Like whatever inspires you, whatever fills you with that creative spark. It could even be as simple as going for a walk.
Oh yeah.
Whatever
helps me.
fills your soul. That's the kind of thing. It could be something like my big thing that I love to do is jump in my car and go to different cafes. It's a little vice of mine, I suppose. I love coffee and I love music, so I'll pop my pair of headphones in, go to a cafe,
I
and I'll
feel like
sit
we're
there.
the same person.
you're both such hipsters.
Creative people, there's DNA, right?
That's what it
But I
is.
feel like creativity, the spirit, there has to be like some kind of DNA factor.
We're born with it, George. We're born talented. Yeah, right? Maybe that's what it is.
See, you're fable
Are we,
makers,
Jake?
not fable breakers.
I want to talk a little bit about your book Paris, because it's always
Sure.
been one of my favorites, and I talk about it to everyone. And I have it on I have a signed copy of Paris, and I'm always shoving it in people's faces and stuff. You made it a little while ago, a couple years ago, right? A few years ago. And it won a silver award in Japan. Could you, I know you probably get asked this a lot, but tell us about that.
Well, production
Okay.
was I'm trying to rewind to a good starting point, but basically I was working at a part-time job at a printing place, which is anyway. So the other part-time was devoted to comics. So I was drawing Bite Size at the time, the first few years of it. I also drew Paris in my spare time, and I released it on my site, page by page. It was a terrible way to release the story, but I finally got it finished. It was like 100 and something pages, like 120 pages. And I decided, I was doing self-publishing at the time because I couldn't get in touch with any actual publishers, which is something we could talk about, how hard it is to even get a publisher to talk to these days. But because I couldn't get in contact with any of them, I'm like, well, screw it. I want to publish my own books. I'm going to do the convention thing. I'm going to try to sell my own books. So I printed a couple of copies of Paris. A bunch of people bought them. Not a lot.
I bought one.
Thank you. Bless you. It's, but my site was, I guess it was friends and family mostly and a little bit of word of mouth online, but it wasn't really popular. Not a lot of people knew about it. And getting into conventions is another nightmare. So that was almost impossible to get the audience growth that I wanted. But anyway, the book existed. That's the important thing. And I heard about this contest in Japan, which is just basically like submit your manga. And, I submitted Paris. I mailed it to them, and I totally forgot about it. And a few months later, I get this random email from like the Japanese consulate in New York City.
Oh my gosh.
And it was a very quick, few months, and they flew me over to Japan. There was this whole beautiful week and a half where I was hanging out with all kinds of people from like, they were called the Japan Foundation. Anybody can submit their comics to this thing, and I highly recommend giving it a shot. But basically, I went there for a week and a half. They did this whole ceremony. They gave me a trophy, and it was just the best. It was the coolest.
That is so cool.
And yeah, it got recognized, which was one of the biggest things professionally for me. Is like, I've been drawing all my comics all these years in basically obscurity. Just my family and friends knew about it. But now, all of a sudden, these people, all on the other side of the world, like where manga basically originated, and so much of my influences were manga, and I was like, wow, these people acknowledge that I exist. And not only that, they're giving me an award. And I'm like, man, it's so... That was like, I did a little speech and everything. And I was like, oh, you guys recognized me. I can't even get recognized at home.
Oh, no.
And it was so pathetic. My speech was like, well, I'm basically going back home now. And nobody's going to know who I exist.
Virtual anonymity, right?
Yeah.
I say that jokingly.
But,
I'm your
well,
fan, George.
it's my fault. I'm sorry. I don't mean to, like, I'm not fishing.
Okay.
I promise. I'm just basically like, one of my biggest flaws professionally, and I keep saying this to everybody and I feel so bad, but like, I'm just not good at getting myself out there. I don't want to befriend people for the sake of, hey, I'm going to take advantage of you. You know, I want it to be natural. I love the idea of word of mouth. I try to tell everybody that I can, as much as I can, hey, please tell your friends about this comic if you like it. I can't do advertising. I don't really want to. It's cheap. It's fake. It's, I don't know. The idea has always been, for better or for worse, that if people like the stuff, they would share it. And even if one person tells two people, you know, by the time I'm 50, who knows?
Well, there is value in networking, I think, and I'd like to encourage you a little bit with that too.
Sure.
And I'm a little younger than you, and I'm young and spry, and I get around a little bit, but I think, and I probably am a little bit more social than you, and I like to put myself out there, not necessarily advertising, but meeting new people, and I like the give and take. So I think there has to be kind of a give and a take. So when you're putting your comics out there, but there are other artists out there who have a lot to give as well to you. So I think I'd like to encourage you too to kind of to try to connect with other people in that way. You know, you can push stuff out, but I think it is important to take from other people too. You know, take inspiration, take you know, even if it's just a social thing. I found that's really been encouraging for me, and maybe that can be encouraging for you. But who knows? Maybe one day I'll be old and bitter, and I won't care as much. But
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. I hope not.
You're a very different person than me, and that's a great thing.
Oh, good. I don't know. I wouldn't say that's a good thing, but only time will tell, I guess.
You mean not every artist is an introvert, Jake?
Oh my gosh. Incredible. I learn something new.
Mind blown.
I learn something new every day.
Being an extrovert, or even having a little bit of extroversion, goes so far. That's one of the downsides to having a melancholic personality. You might be able to do some good writing. I think that's the trick.
And you can brood, right? You're like an expert brooder.
Yes.
You're really good at brooding.
But that can be an asset when it comes to writing, especially. I think it makes it hard to be social sometimes. But man, as long as the people don't exist, I get along with them so well. I can write a storm.
There we go.
As long as the people aren't real.
Now we know why you write so much. You're making friends.
You know, I'm joking, but actually, now that I say it out loud, I'm like, you know,
well,
there might be something to that.
I've kind of seen a little bit of that with your webcomic, Bite Size. Which,
as I say that out loud, I'm like, oh no, I've been caught.
Like, I feel like, okay, so the main character is kind of you, right? His name is Gregory Alexander, right? Is it? I see a lot of attributes in him. I think he's probably a lot sillier than you, but do you draw inspiration from yourself for him? Like, where do you get it? Where does he?
He's a really exaggerated version of me.
Okay.
I would say at this point he is his own person for sure.
Okay.
If anyone reads the strip, I'm probably a lot more like Xavier than Greg most of the time.
Yeah.
In terms of like, I don't put up with nonsense.
Yeah, she's always cracking him over the head with metal pipes and stuff and trying to get him, like, get inspired, let's go. Kick it
That's
into gear.
my inner boot camp instructor telling my inner emo person, like, hey, knock it off.
And that's what we talked about last time with Minty, actually, about how, like, original characters a lot of times are, like, just pieces of yourself, you know? And I've seen that in Xavier and in Greg, so it's so funny how you kind of, like, split yourself into two there.
I could line up all my characters and say, you got this from me, you got this from me.
That's fair, though. They each get a little piece of your soul. And I know I keep talking about the spirit and everything. I don't know why I'm in this mood.
You've dealt with some art theft recently.
Yeah.
2 incidences of which I've seen. There was one a couple years ago, I think, and then one recently, just a few weeks ago. And my question to you is there a solution? How should these things be handled properly? Because I think you handled it really gracefully, but what was that like for you?
I guess I won't go into specifics anymore because it's over. So I don't want to like encourage anybody to think that like, anyway, it doesn't matter. The solution, the positive end of it was that let's say somebody's doing something with your art that you don't want. I think probably the best solution to that is to try to get in touch with them, obviously. If they won't get in touch with you, you want to try to get as many people's eyes on it as possible. Fortunately, my strip and my friends and people online, they seemed to have resonated with, I guess I just made this big call to help. Like, I don't know what to do about this. And I basically took screenshots of the instance, as many as I could. And I put them side by side and I said, hey, you know, should I do something about this, blah, blah. And basically, as many people as possible knew about it. And that made the person or individuals involved kind of backtrack, and it's over. Not a problem. So pretty much the 2 pieces of advice I would have is A, keep records of everything, and B, try to tell as many people as possible so that it's brought to light. Secrecy is probably the biggest asset to somebody. If they were, in this case, I don't think there was like an actual intent to do harm or anything like that. It was just an unfortunate mistake, not a problem. But if somebody actually wanted to do damage to you, like keep your originals, keep records, tell everybody. That's my advice, I suppose. Yeah.
That's always something that's terrified me. I've always been a little scared of art theft, and maybe I'd be flattered at first. That would be nice if someone wants to steal my stuff or copy it. But it really is something that's kind of prevalent, and a couple of my friends who have larger followings online, they've experienced that. So I think that is really helpful advice. Hold on to your originals, so you can kind of bring it up, and it does help to have. I mean, it always helps to have a nice kind of following who's going to back you up. Yeah, but it's kind of scary. But you handled it really well. I think you got over it. And it was handled pretty quickly. So I'm glad that was kind of over and done with. I know I was pretty furious when it happened. I'm always furious when I see that stuff, but I was pretty livid. So I'm glad you handled it correctly and kind of made a nice example for other people who are going through that kind of thing. So thank you for that.
Thank you guys, especially you, Jake, for spreading the word.
Yeah, you should have seen me. I made a Webtoon account just so I can go on the person's thing and like comment on every single one of their thing, tell them how awful it is what they were doing. So, and now I'm like actually following comics on Webtoon. So go figure. Now I got something out of the experience.
It's kind of a good little app.
It is.
I say to myself, like, it's kind of like YouTube for comics.
I want to talk a little bit about your art school experience, because next week we're going to have a guest who's going to speak about that, and I'm interested to hear your perspective. I know you probably didn't have the best experience, but I want to hear about it because I know you weren't there for long, but what was that decision like for you to kind of step back from that?
All right, well, I guess the first thing to let everyone know is that I'm a college dropout. I'm an art school dropout. So what that means, all right, that's the foreshadowing.
I didn't want to frame it like that. I wasn't trying to.
No,
but...
I don't want to give anyone the impression that I think it's a good idea or that anyone else should do it. But in my specific case, and I'll get into that in a sec, it was the right move, at least at the time. So I went to school in 2003. I graduated from high school, and in my senior year, I had to, confront, oh, what am I going to do with myself? What am I good at? What do I want to do with my life? And of course, everybody has that panicky moment where they say, I haven't thought about this. So I looked at myself. I said, what are my skills? What are my passions? I said, all right, fine, art school. And it so happened that there was a school of visual arts in New York City that had a cartooning curriculum, cartooning specifically, like comics. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, that seems like a great opportunity. So long story short, I signed up, blah, blah. They accepted me. I did my freshman year, but I commuted. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the strikes, I suppose, that went against me socially, is that I was not able to socialize, it would seem. A lot of the people, when I got to school my freshman year, they already seemed to be friends. They had already formed cliques. And, well, I'm sure it's as simple as walking up to a group and just introducing yourself.
Carly's
There's really nothing. No? You don't think so?
Well, it's simple in terms of you walk right up and open your mouth and say words. What you're forgetting, at least in the case of some people, is the crippling fear inside you as you take those steps and open your mouth and say those words.
That definitely was what happened to me. All I did was I spent an hour and a half commuting to school and an hour and a half coming back, right? So by the time I got to class, I just had to go to class. And then by the time class was over, I had to jump back on the bus and go back home. So I didn't have time to hang with people.
Yeah.
Whereas if they were dorming there, I don't know how people dormed there. It wasn't like an official campus. It was just a bunch of buildings scattered throughout downtown. Mm-hmm. But I assume a bunch of people would hang and get to know each other from different, the illustrators were here, the animators were here, everybody got to know each other. Anyway, so basically that was strike one for me, is that I socially didn't get a lot out of it. But that was my fault. The thing that bothered me more than that was in my second year, as my second year started, I didn't get any financial aid. The first year I got a bunch. So my financial aid dropped. And to me at the time, it seemed inconceivable that I was going to borrow money. I didn't know how it worked. And nobody in my family at the time had gone to college. So we didn't really know how it worked either. We didn't want to borrow money. I didn't want to borrow money. So that was strike two. And strike three was finally, I had to take all these classes that had nothing to do with cartooning. And I was fed up with my foundation year.
There it is.
Well, I was hearing about all these animation majors where they had a 4-year curriculum where it was like immediately, bam, first year you're learning animation. I was like, all right, why can't I do that with cartooning? Why do I have to take a humanities course? Why do I have to take math? Why do I have to take science? To my 19-year-old brain, and even now to my 31-year-old brain, it is just an arbitrary, it's a joke to me. I don't know how that has anything to do with the curriculum. I need to spend that time on my craft. I knew what I wanted. Mm-hmm. So I was just fed up with the whole school thing. I told myself, like, look, I don't need a degree to tell people that I know how to draw comics. All I have to do is literally just draw comics nonstop for 3 years. And I would basically get the same education that I would in school, and I wouldn't spend any money on it.
What you mentioned just now about taking those years and drawing for yourself, and you mentioned something related to that earlier. It seems like kind of underneath what you're saying is that the key to getting started in this industry or in any industry really is taking the time and working to build your craft. And maybe in the case of some people that can replace going to art school. Would you say that's kind of like the key to you is time and hard work?
It really does depend on the subject, I suppose. But when it comes to the arts that I'm specifically involved with, I see no difference. Even as a teacher now, I sometimes teach. Just sit on your butt or wherever with a pencil in your hand, and you can teach yourself more than hours and hours of talking to a teacher. What they basically do at these classes is they sit you down and they tell you to draw. Mm-hmm. They can maybe give you a few pointers, but why couldn't you, now that YouTube exists or you can watch other people draw, there's a million ways, especially when it comes to drawing or painting or stuff like that. You just have to you put in the hours. There's the 10,000 hour rule. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one.
Sounds familiar.
It was popularized or maybe invented by this guy named Malcolm Gladwell. And the basic idea is that if you spend 10,000 hours doing anything, you'll master it. So roughly, I think that equates to like 10 years of full-time practice, maybe less. But I think that's fairly accurate. I was terrible at drawing when I was 10. I was way better when I was 20. And now I'm 30, and drawing is like I can do it in my sleep. Not that I'm sounding like I'm braggy or anything, but it's like it's as natural as driving to me. I just don't think about it anymore.
Yeah, it's a skill that you have to work towards, like building up a comfort level.
Yeah.
It really is just training your muscle memory. That's what I tell my students. You're just telling your hand to obey either the image in your mind or better, the image that you see in your eye. There's like these neural pathways or whatever. I know I'm sounding like
Dr. George. Dr.
I don't know what I'm talking. I think it's neural pathways. It's like the same as if you're trying to shoot a basket a million times. You're training the nerve endings in your body, your muscles. There's like a million different nerve endings communicating with each other to shoot the perfect basket from anywhere. You do it 1,000 times, 2,000 times. You're going to nail it every time. It's the same with drawing. When you're drawing, like imagine you're doing surgery or something. We're talking like lines have to be within a millimeter of each other. Just you have to train. Like maybe when you're 10 or 15 years old, your lines might be off by half an inch. That's terrible. But then you keep forcing your hand to obey you, and now it's a centimeter. Now it's half a centimeter. Now it's a millimeter. Now you're doing photorealistic stuff like you, Jake, especially. Your stuff when you were like 18 years old was incredible.
Yeah.
It was photorealistic.
Anymore, but
Probably because you got so good at it, you got bored.
Well, that's a nice way to put it.
What I'm saying is that you got so good at it just because of the repetition. Not because you're born with it. It's just putting in the hours. I'm sorry. So to wrap it back to the school thing, I'm sorry, Carly. Yes, I think there is a lot to be gained from the school thing. Like in terms of social connections, there's a lot to be gained from school in that sense. You can gain a lot of knowledge from your teachers, but really the thing that brings up your skills the most is having a pencil in your hand. Even at more advanced levels, you don't even need to have a pencil in your hand to practice drawing.
I hear that with writing a lot too, that there's this amazing article that my professors gave me in my manuscript course this last semester before I graduated, that had this great concept about we should consider ourselves always in a state of writing instead of not writing. And that, writing doesn't have to mean sitting at a computer and typing things up. Like writing is the way I think about my characters and the plots of my stories as I'm trying to fall asleep at night. And all those other things, like you said, you don't have to hold a pencil in your hands to draw. You don't have to write either. It can be all these little things that are going on in your head. And as kind of silly or really grandiose as it might sound, we should always consider ourselves being full-time artists, no matter what we're doing, that it's just our minds and who we are, that we are always in the state of producing art.
Carly, are you one of those people who narrates herself in third person all the time?
Not in third person, but I will admit I do talk to myself. I explain things as if I was telling someone else, but I'm the only one there because if I don't know if my friends can't hang out or anything and I need to talk out a story issue, I'm the only one there and I can pretend as if I'm talking to someone, and it usually helps. You just have to get your brain working in some way and, make it work.
It's like muscle memory kind of thing. You're kind of working through it and you're making it. And I'm sure after 10,000 hours it'll be easier to kind of say what you're trying to say or definitely to draw what you're trying to draw. So I've never heard that before, but that's kind of an interesting concept. I wonder how accurate it is. I'm
interested to hear about how you got into gaming, because now you're doing art for games also. And so you're into cartoons and comics, but also video games. And I'm just wondering what was interesting about video games to you. What made you want to work with them?
I guess the quickest answer is that they're all related in terms of my favorite things about all of these media, as I mentioned before, is the stories, the characters. the atmosphere, music, the worlds. It's just pure fantasy. It's so much fun to visit these worlds. Games are of course special in that they're interactive. They're fun for various reasons. Every genre is different. So I just loved playing games when I was a kid, and I still do. It's just one of those things that we were talking about before, where it's like, I love it, therefore I want to make it. So there came a few times during my late 20s when I was still working at the print shop. I don't remember the exact sequence, but a couple of guys got in touch with me. And basically, I don't remember how they saw my stuff. I think it was because I did this one comic about Dark Souls that was really popular and famous, and like a bazillion people saw it. And these guys contacted me out of nowhere, and they're like, "Hey, we want to make games. Do you want to make games?" And I said, "Yes, I want to make games." And I basically failed my way up the ladder, and I kept learning how to make games, how to make art for games. And 5 years later, I'm basically doing games full time.
Cool.
There's a million different rungs on the ladder.
Yeah.
But
That's interesting, failing your way up the ladder.
yeah, the first 5 projects failed or were canceled, sadly. All of them were indie projects. And we basically, on every project, either ran out of... we all wanted to do the projects, but we all ran out of money. That's a common theme.
But at least you're going up the ladder, right? That's what's important, is your goal. I mean, I'm sure you learned stuff about... I mean, and here you are now doing 3D modeling, which I'd argue is pretty tough.
It's the 10,000 hour rule again, honestly. It's like I keep doing it. It's like I love RPGs, so I'll speak in terms of like experience points. Except in this case, even if you lose battles, you still gain experience points. So I've lost a ton of battles, but...
That's really encouraging, actually. That's such a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And there are some games that do that. I play some games where even if you lose, you get experience. That's
such a neat way to look at it. Because it really is. I mean, you can only, I think, get better. You can fall out of practice with things, but I really do think that artists and creative people, unless they have like a major meltdown, like they really do. You can get better as long as you love it. I kind of wanted to get your take on the freelancing world as a whole, because it seems like you had a lot of challenges, right? You've done mostly everything, I feel, yourself, right? So you made the decision to kind of take a step back from art school, and you made the decision to freelance and everything. Is it worth it to be your own boss and to have creative control? And is it worth it being like an artist in general? Is it worth it for you? I want to know about that.
I'm glad that you said for you. For me, it's... Not to sound melodramatic, but for me, it feels like the only option. I think about conventional jobs, like, let's say I needed to work even at a Starbucks, or I'll tell you the true stories of, like, I've tried to work at a cafe, and I quit after 3 days. And my record is 5 hours when I worked at a diner, and I basically ran out the door at like midnight. I was like, I can't take this. I can't do this.
Wow.
Part of that is the introvert thing. I just can't stand to be around people for too long, especially like it's like a muscle. And the longer I tense the muscle, I just get so tired. I have to go back and be by myself for a while. Anyway, so for me, conventional jobs are almost impossible. And I know that sounds so melodramatic. I hope that doesn't come off as like pretentious or something. But like even an office job, I need to have a job where people don't bother me. My print job, I did it for like 5 years. It was fine, but I was just so unchallenged. I don't know how to put it. It wasn't doing anything for me. Anyway, long story short, I would say this kind of career, it presented itself, and I want it. I'm taking it as hard as I can. Even if it means sometimes like some years are better than others, let's say. Freelancing, like you might get good contracts one year, and then you might get no contracts. And then you might have to, do stuff on the side that you're not really, it's not like growing, but it's kind of moving parallel. Like for me, It was art teaching a couple of years ago, where I love teaching, but I love teaching at high levels. And a lot of the jobs that were hiring teaching at the time was like mostly kids, which is fine, but they don't quite like. At worst, it was babysitting. At best, it was like, hey, just keep practicing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the best lesson I can give any kid is like, just keep practicing. Like, there's no point in me telling you or grading you. Like, I'm not going to grade anybody. Like, just put in more hours. Give me $50 now, thank you. Like, I can't give you better advice than that.
Yeah.
That's really interesting that you went from having kind of a difficult time in art school to being a teacher of art.
Yes, there is that horrible saying, those who can't do teach.
I wasn't implying that at all.
No, that's I took the words out of my own mouth. That's true. I actually do like teaching. The sad fact is, like, if I wanted to teach high school or college level, let's say, at least I can with drawing and painting. Usually those jobs are like, the irony is they require a degree.
Yeah.
Most of the time, at least to get the interview. For them to even look at your portfolio, which I think is just so ironic and hilarious. Like, Vincent van Gogh did not have a degree.
That's true.
Yeah.
Neither did Da Vinci. He gave himself a degree. But I understand, like, there's just a pile of applicants and you want to sort out who's who.
I've been seeing that more and more where, because you think about how the portfolio has kind of developed now, right? And everyone has at least, a website portfolio. And the first thing you see is the work, right? You don't, know, you're not seeing resume. And I understand what you're saying, how, like, and I do that too, because I have to interview people at my company where we have to kind of look through, a bunch of resumes and see who's a little bit more qualified. But at the end of the day, it is their portfolio that I'm looking at. And like I was saying with these portfolio websites, the first thing you see is the work. So, I don't really give a hoot afterwards, as much really, which school they went to. If their work is fantastic, like, I want them. So, maybe for certain jobs it is more important, but I think that shouldn't be a main focus. It should be really improving the work and loving the work before anything.
Having a degree just means that you can memorize information and repeat it to a teacher.
Yep.
I don't necessarily, there are instances where, like, if you're a doctor, you better be able to repeat that information. But there are, especially in a creative field, just having raw talent goes so much farther than a degree. Anyway, we could talk about that for hours. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, one last question for you, George. So, what advice would you give to an artist or writer who is struggling with their art, or struggling to make a living, or hoping to make a living with their art, but they're afraid? So you can get as practical or as philosophical as you would like with this answer.
Be willing to fail. There is something in the creative spirit, again, I keep saying that just has to be creative. It's not something that's voluntary. If you are sitting in a room with nothing to do and you're drawing, you're writing, maybe you're making music, I don't even know. There's a million different disciplines. But if it's like the opposite of a weed, like a poetic weed that keeps growing, even though, like, maybe it gets uprooted. I use Emily Dickinson as an example, Jane Austen, we talk about Van Gogh. It's just these people were not getting paid to do what they were doing. They were doing it because they have to. It's a part of them. They love it. It's beautiful. They get better and better at it the more they do it. So the first and most important piece of advice, I suppose, would be, like, don't necessarily try to do it as a career. It's viable. But the dangerous and scary thing about it is sometimes it is just a lottery, and there's nothing you can do to control whether you will get popular or hit the big time. You just don't know. There are things like, when it comes to income, it's really just a matter of, is there a market for what your product is? Let's say you're writing a book. Is anybody going to buy it? Can you convince a publisher that you're going to buy it? Let's say you want to self-publish your own comics. You have to give a piece of your profits to the printer, distributor. You have to give money to the convention people. Everybody's taking a piece and everybody's making money on your comics, your hard work, but you're not taking any profits because it's basically the entrepreneur thing. So it can be really scary. You might have to do a lot of work on the side. So my second huge piece of advice is, maybe, I know that this is the dumb adult thing. I didn't want to hear this when I was growing up or even in my 20s. You might want to invest in having something on the side, not because it's going to take up your time or your focus, but just in terms of raw income. You need to make money from something. And maybe from art, you're not going to make money. Comics, there's not a lot of money in comics unless you're working for like Marvel or DC, but you're not going to get creative fulfillment from that. From writing books and publishing books, you're not going to get a lot of money from that either. So the scary question to ask yourself is, what am I going to do on the side? That's a very practical and difficult and personal question. I can't decide that for anybody. Even if I had an art student in front of me, I would say, I can't give you any advice to make money, but I can tell you everything you need to know up to and including how to print your own books. After that, you're on your own. I don't know the magic formula. I think it's just what we call going viral. Getting 1 million eyes on your work, and each of those eyes pays like $1, and now you have $1 million.
Well, it's like that lottery thing too. And maybe there's something to be said for people who buy 1 million lottery tickets. You know, they're going to hit the jackpot someday, or they're more likely to. And I don't think that should be getting in the way. Yeah, it's a lottery, but like, don't let that stop you, from trying to, make something beautiful or even trying to get lucky, that shouldn't stop people. That shouldn't get in the way of people and what they create. Thank you, George, for sharing your artistic wisdom with us. If you're listening and you'd like to see George's work, you can visit his website at studionj.com or find him on Patreon, Facebook, Twitter, and, of course, on Webtoon, where you can read a majority of his work, including his award-winning graphic novel Paris, which is one of my favorites, along with Bite Size, his webcomic. And all of those links are going to be in the description for this video. And thank you to our listeners. We appreciate your support. Fablebreakers is a young podcast. We're only a couple of episodes along, but your feedback and your support is really keeping us going. It's so cool to read that people are getting things from it, and they're really enjoying it. If you're into busting up more fables, then you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, all at Fablebreakers. And that'll do it for today's episode. I'm your host, Jake Romano.
And I'm Carly Racklin, and you've been listening to Fablebreakers.